Well, hello folks. Today we're going to begin the process of assembling the lower end of the little Yamaha YL1. We're going to begin by installing the bearings in the left crankcase half, which you see in the video right now. We're going to begin with the crankshaft, left crankshaft bearing. Here's the original bearing that I took out some months ago. This bearing came out of this spot right here where my finger is pointing to. I think you can see, let's see if we can get that bearing in focus for you. This is 6204. And I believe that is there. There you can see the number right there. And it's quite, in fact, there's, you can probably see, and here, it's quite notchy. In fact, it catches like right there. It's got a catch on it. So that's the original. I've got new bearings for this that right now are on ice, and I'll come back to that and talk about that in a minute. But there's two things really I need to accomplish here, essentially simultaneously. One is I'm going to heat this bearing boss here up with my hot air gun, and then I'm going to take the replacement bearing, which is on ice right now because they've been in the house freezer for quite some time, and that's the simultaneous part. I have to take the chilled down bearing, and I do that so it'll shrink, drop it into the heated space boss right here, and then seat it. And sometimes they'll literally drop right in because this is expanded when it's heated. This is shrunk because it's been frozen, and other times you have to do a little persuasion, and that's what this is for if I need it. This is just a piece of PVC pipe that I cut off. It's not quite as large as I would like it. I would like it to be a little bit bigger, but that's what I have that will work. So I'll take the frozen bearing, place it in here. If it won't drop right in, then I will take this piece of PVC essentially and use it as a driver like this. Put a piece of plywood on the top and then hit it with a mallet. That's essentially what we may have to do. So the next thing I'm going to do is heat this boss with a hot air gun, and then once I get that really good and hot, then I will take the bearing out of the ice and drop it into place. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and begin the process using this hot air gun of heating this boss up. I won't show this whole thing on video because this could take 4 or 5 minutes. But essentially I'm going to heat both sides of the boss like you see here. I'll go around and around gently. And then eventually I will do the inside as well until it gets too hot to touch. And then I'll attempt to install the bearing. Okay, I think I've got this about as hot as it's going to get. It's been about probably at least 4 minutes, maybe 5, and it's really hot. In fact, even over where my left hand is holding the case, it's quite warm. So now I got to move quickly. Time now will be of the essence because as this aluminum casting starts to normalize or cool, I've got to get that bearing out of the ice, position it with the nomenclature, that is the labeling facing me out or the inside of the engine so it can be seen, and drop it into place. And if it doesn't drop down, then I'll have to seat it with the PVC driver, block of wood, and the hammer. So once I stop this, I will move quite quickly. There's the bearing. Nomenclature is facing me. Oop, there we go. Nomenclature is now facing me. And it is not an exact fit. Pretty close. And there it is. Now you'll notice, it's pretty hot. You'll notice I didn't use any, or attempt to use any lubricant, because it really won't last. By the time you heat this case and you get this very hot, it'll burn off. So it doesn't really make any difference unless you are having an extremely high temperature lubricant, which I don't have. So I don't even bother with that for something like this. The next thing I'll do is I'll take the my air gun and I'll blow out any residual from the PVC. You can see the ends of it there. That might have slivers that might have gotten down in there. I'll clean that out. I won't spin the bearing, but I will clean it out, make sure it's there's no residual PVC. But that's the left crankshaft bearing. The next step is I will move on to this larger bearing here for the transmission, or my fingers. That's the output shaft. Okay, we're going to move on now to the output shaft bearing, which is where my left index finger is pointing. Here's the original bearing that came out of there. If we can show this to you, that's a 6304 metric bearing, of course. There, I think you can see it. I have a replacement bearing on ice. I'm going to repeat the process that I just did for the crankshaft bearing, which is I'm going to heat this boss as hot as I can, and then I'm going to go ahead and quickly drop the bearing in place, and if it doesn't fall in easily, then I'll use the PVC. This is 1.25 inches, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that before. Now this won't fit exactly, and I don't have the right size PVC. I either have something too small like this or too big. So what I'm going to have to do, if I have to drive it, I'm going to have to overlap it like that and work my way around carefully so that it goes in straight. That's my alternative right now. So let's go ahead and get this boss heated up. Again, I'm not going to show the entire process, but as I'm finishing that up, I will cut back to this, and you'll see me dropping the bearing into place. Okay, I got this case about as hot as I think I'm going to get it. It's very hot. In fact, it's so hot that I can't touch it over on the left side with my hand. That's why I'm handling it over on this end. This is quite warm, but it's not so hot it will burn me. Where I'm heating it with a hot air gun, it would burn me if I touched it right now. So what I've got to do again is drop this, grab the new bearing, position it, drop it into place. If it doesn't drop in on its own, then I'm going to grab that PVC driver, hammer, and block of wood and head at it. You notice I support this so it doesn't move. I'm going to go ahead and grab the bearing. Again, I'm going to position it with the nomenclature and the labeling facing out, like that. Again, that one won't drop in either, but it's closer than the other one was. So now I'm going to have to start tapping it in. Okay, I think I've got it in okay. What you see I'm doing here is checking to make sure it's seated all the way here, and it looks like it is. And it's flush on this side. You notice I had to improvise at the end. I wasn't able to just get this to work, this PVC, the way I wanted, so I switched to using just this block of wood like that, and that actually worked quite well. So it's very typical, you have to improvise on these things. So I got both bearings seated. Now I'm going to go ahead and blow them both out, make sure there's no wood or PVC chips in there, and then I'll come back and we'll finish the conversation. Okay, I think we're about done with this step, that is installing the bearings. On the right where my finger is the crankshaft, left crankshaft bearing. Crankshaft will go through like this, and this on the left is the output shaft bearing. That's where the output shaft and the transmission will go through, and the sprocket for the chain, the drive chain, will sit on the opposite side. Now the seals, which will fit here and here, will go in much later. In fact, I don't even have the seals yet. I think I just ordered them the other day, and I don't have them yet. But there's no rush on those. It'll be a little while before I get to the seals. The bearings that I used, I just went down to my local bearing house and gave them a list of the original bearings that I had. Came out of the motor, and asked them to supply me with new ones. They typically carry 3 or 4 different quality of bearings, and I always ask for the very best that they have. In this case, I've gotten them from all over the world, with the exception of certain countries in the Far East. I won't use their bearings, but I will use Japanese bearings, certainly. The Japanese make very good bearings, but other countries in the Far East I typically won't use. American-made, European-made, and these happen to be the replacements here, made in Argentina. I think you can see that. SKF is a very, very good brand. It's a premium brand of bearing, so I have no concerns with using these bearings whatsoever. But again, there are many countries that make great bearings, so I could have gotten them from Yamaha. They do still support these parts, but I've just gotten them from my bearing supplier for so long. On every engine I've rebuilt, I just follow that same practice here. So that's about the wrap on this step. Next stage will be to install the crank here. That's when I'll use this little crank puller tool that I featured in a previous video to pull the crank in this way out here, and then the transmission, once the crank's in, then the transmission will drop in. I'll assemble it on the left side like this. The transmission and shift drum will go in here, and then obviously the other side of the engine will go on. So that'll be future videos will feature those steps. So that's it for now, I think. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention. If you recall, when I was adding this or installing this large output shaft bearing, I'd indicated that using this drift wasn't working for me. I could tell. That's very common. You have to improvise, and that's all I did is toss this aside and grab this piece of lumber because it worked perfectly, and used it like this, and then the bearing went right in. Don't be concerned if you have to do that. It happens to me all the time, those kind of things. You got to improvise in the middle. If I had a larger piece of PVC and I just don't, that would work. 2 inches too large, it comes way out here. I suppose I could have taken a 2-inch piece of PVC and turned it down, but then the wall would get quite thin, and I try to work with what I have if I can do it. So that's why I switched midstream. Even if the case had cooled down, I would have just kept going. I wouldn't have let that deter me. I heat the case first to make it easier, along with freezing of the bearings. And literally, I've had a couple cases where they'll virtually drop in a couple little taps and they go. Others, they don't. And you just have to deal with it at the time. So I think that's a wrap for this one. Any questions, drop me a note and I'll comments below on the video. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.